All right, let's talk about it. So, today we're going to be talking about 210.6. 210.6 just basically goes through the acceptable voltages for a lot of different applications. And so here we go. Okay, so 210.6a is for dwelling units. It specifically deals with, houses and condos and stuff like that. And what you got to remember about dwelling units is essentially everything's 120 volts. 120 volts in luminaires and cord-connected loads under 1440 volt amps. So you'll notice everything in a house, the lights, the receptacles, all those things are 120 volts until you get into larger appliances like an oven or a dryer or a range or something like that. So acceptable things at not over 120 volts are regular lamp holders. If you have that screw-in style lamp holder, it's going to have to be 120 volts. Electric discharge lamps, 120 volts. You can have cord and plug or permanently connected equipment is going to be acceptable at 120 volts. Cord and plug or permanently connected equipment is also acceptable at several other voltages. It is acceptable at 120 volts. As is obvious because your toaster runs at 120 volts. Cord and plug connected equipment, Yeah, 120 volt connected equipment. Dishwashers, pumps, sump pumps, all the stuff, everything that has a cord. Also permanently connected equipment, think, one of those hardwired garbage disposals, stuff like that. Your AC unit. Okay, so up to 277 volts. Now 277 volts is a normal voltage for like a commercial or industrial application. So we're going to have some cord and plug or permanently connected equipment at 277 volts. This would probably include, dishwashers, pumps, motors, machinery, anything. Permanently connected or cord and plug can be 277 volts. Although the cord and plug is obviously a little different than 120 volt cord and plug. You get it. Electric discharge lamps with integral ballast. So this is slightly different than the electric discharge lamps. If the ballast is integrated into the lamp, that is, like, you could take it apart, there's a ballast in there, 277 volts is acceptable. Basically, what you'll find in the code is if the manufacturer designed it to operate at that voltage, it's acceptable at that voltage. They lean real hard on that. So 3, where the LED driver or transformer steps down the output to 120 volts or lower. So if you have a transformer inside your luminaire that steps down the voltage from 277 to 120, and then it has a regular lamp holder, basically the portion of the lamp that can shock you is 120 volts, so it's acceptable according to code. An LED driver will generally step down into like 48 or 24 volts, and so that's going to be below your 120 volts. That's going to be acceptable by code. Then again, manufacturers deal with that. We don't generally deal with that. Luminaires with mogul-based lamp holders. A mogul-based lamp holder is a screw-type lamp holder that's just bigger. They use this in movies a lot, and they use it in some commercial applications, although it's almost totally gone away with now. And then any luminaire with a lamp holder that's rated for 277 volts. If the lamp you're supposed to use is 277 volts, then it's going to be acceptable by code to put 277 volts to it. It's easy. Okay, we're going to go to D, up to and including 600 volts. So if your luminaire is 22 foot off the ground on a pole or 18 foot off the ground on the wall of a building, you can run it at 480. And this is important because in spaces that large, you're going to run a lot of wire over a long distance, and it's going to have some voltage drop problems. So you're going to want to run the highest voltage you can out to that. 480 volts is a good choice for that. So in stadiums, say you're running an aircraft hangar, you're going to want to run 480 volt lighting, and that's going to be totally acceptable as long as it's over 22 foot on poles or 18 foot inside structures. You can have cord and plug connected equipment up to 600 volts. And you'll notice there isn't a 480 volt section right here. There's only 277 and up to 600 volts. So when we're talking about 600 volts and below, we're actually talking about substantially 480 volts, like in common practice, what we would commonly use. You can run cord and plug connected equipment on 480 volts. They make a cord and plug, they make a cord for 480 volts. We run it all the time in spider boxes. We run it for welders. We run it for motors. It's just there. And then this is kind of a new one, but I think it's like a really interesting one, a really interesting part of the code. So it says, DC rated luminaires with provisions to prevent shock while changing lamps, or DC luminaires that have with no provisions to change the lamps. So, and I can't think of many places where you would actually have 600 volts DC to run a luminaire. The only exception I can think of is the electric trains in Los Angeles and some other cities. They actually run on 600 volts DC. So in the case that you had 600 volts DC way out of the middle of the track, you could use that 600 volts DC to run luminaires, as long as they have provisions to protect you from shock while changing the bulb, or there's no provisions to change the bulb. So I thought that was cool. It's a nice code section. Over 600 volts. So you can use over 600 volts only where the conditions of maintenance and supervision ensures that only qualified personnel can access that. So that's going to be like a commercial or industrial building where they have a full-time maintenance staff or a full-time electrician, where only qualified persons can gain access to that. You can use circuits over 600 volts. Yeah, and that's code section 210.6. Come back, we'll do 210.7, I suppose.